All right, welcome in. Wes Mitchell here. Jack Veltri joining me here. GC Live. Jack, have we done a GC Live together, man?
So I don't think we have. It's usually you and Chris, right? Or Mike or Joe. So no, I think the only people I've really done shows with are usually Joe and occasionally Mike. So this is it's an honor to be on with you.
Likewise, man. And so we're gonna get into some football. Day one of practice today, of course. We got, 3 segments. So you all can take that for what it is. Like we're not out there watching true 11 on 11 or 7 on 7 or anything like that. But we do get a little glimpse, a little sort of snippet of what's going on. So of course, going to let y'all know everything we heard about that or everything we saw out there at practice. And then, of course, a big commitment for South Carolina and Kendall Daniels, 4-star defensive back out of Virginia, just pledged actually a little bit over an hour ago. So kind of a big day for the Gamecocks going into what could be a big weekend for South Carolina on the recruiting trail as well. Before we get any further, let me tell you all about our buddy Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. Like we told you, I guess that was Wednesday, Clint has entered the transfer portal. He is now with CMG Home Loans. NMLS number 71597. Phone number 803-422-6797. Jack, so I think you're doing apartment living these days, man, but when you buy a home, you have to call Clint, okay?
Yeah,
It's
we'll
in your
see.
contract.
Maybe like 20 years in the future, we'll have to see.
Well, even if you just wanted to
Yeah.
see
Oh yeah.
what that might look like, what are interest rates? What would my possible payment look like per month? Clint, not only a huge Gamecock, but he's been in the mortgage business for a number of years. Good buddy of mine. He took care of me and my wife. He wants to take care of all the Gamecock fans out there. So y'all just hit him up. Obviously, you're in the market for a home. 803-422-6797. All right, let's get down to it, Jack. Practice number one. There's always energy, man. That's probably the case everywhere across college football. But we were out there, beautiful day, a little warm, but no, they didn't have to go inside. It wasn't an issue where weather was going to be a factor. So that was obviously a good thing. But I tell you what caught my eye, Jack. I'm not saying there weren't a guy or two that was held out, a guy or two that might be going through kind of, the little rehab stuff they do on the side. But do you remember at the end of spring when we were out there and it just felt like there was an entire team's worth of guys on the side, either going through work or just watching because they were dealing with injuries. Rocket wasn't out there at all during the spring in terms of actually practicing. When they were warming up, to me, it just kind of caught my attention. I'm like, hey, it looks like we're actually seeing an entire football team out here getting ready to practice, which for Gamecock fans who have kind of been beat down by injuries, it feels like the last couple of years, that would have been a welcome sight for them to see what we saw out there.
Yeah, you're definitely right. In the spring, like you said, a lot of guys banged up. You noticeably didn't have Nick Harbor out there during spring practice just because, he had track going on. But everyone seemingly was, out there today. And I think it was, like you said, a definite shift in energy. We've heard these guys talk about for, yesterday at Media Day and obviously Shane Beamer over the last few weeks talking about the energy and how excited these guys are to get back out there and, really, start the season, but also kind of flush out what happened last year. And you could definitely tell there was a good bit of energy. I think if there's any takeaways from today, because you got to remember, for the media, we're only there for the first 3 periods of practice, and that's 15 minutes worth. So we didn't get to see a ton today. But from what we did get to see, I think energy and excitement was definitely the biggest thing. You had guys going around. I saw Juju McDowell, who looked like he's ready to go for the season. I know he had the season-ending injury last year, but you could see him out there, dapping up and high-fiving all his guys during the stretching lines and stuff. So that was something that caught my eye. And then there were other guys doing the same sort of deal. But my point is, the energy was there today, the excitement was there, and I'm sure these guys are ready to get pads on and then ready to hit each other. But at some point, it's going to get like, all right, when's the real season starting? I'm tired of kind of hitting the same guys every day. So this is going to be a long, but also pretty quick month. And before you know it, 8:31 will be here and opening game against Old Dominion.
Yeah, and I think, Jack, man, if you don't have energy on day one, then there are problems. Like
Oh yeah,
that's when everybody has energy. I think the difficult thing for a staff and for players and for leaders, when you start getting into week 3 and you're tired of hitting your teammates and it's gotten kind of that lull has settled in, that's when you really need those leaders, I think, to bring that energy. And Juju's certainly a guy, man, that does that. Also, not only had last season cut short, remember he had the spring cut short as well. So that's a
right.
kid that's been through a lot, has a lot more competition around him in that room now as well. And certainly a guy that I think his value to this team and program goes pretty far beyond what he does on the actual field. No surprise, Rocket Sanders was out there. That's something Gamecock fans, though, will love to hear just confirmed, because we know he's going to be a big part of what they try to do on offense this coming season. And, I thought even just seeing like Mo Kaba, who did have a fairly sizable brace on his knee, but seeing him just out there dressed out, not in a non-contact jersey. And again, they're in shells. They're not in like full pads today. There's that NCAA period they have to go through. But still, just for Kaba to be out there fully dressed out, I thought that was a good sign based on just considering everything he's gone through and been through in terms of the injuries there. And, Jack, I think if we want to maybe give people a couple of little details, again, we're not watching offense versus defense out there. Heavy special teams emphasis normally in that first little part of practice. That hasn't changed. And, man, I think when you lose Limbo, you wonder what that's going to be like. But Joe D, to me, I mean, it's a little different personality, a little different take, but there actually are some similarities to, I would say, Joe D's just love for the game and for special teams and attention to detail when compared with what you had with Pete Limbo.
Yeah, to kind of hit on everything you just talked about there, starting with special teams, that definitely was the main focus we saw in that first few periods. And I kind of wonder, I'm sure it'll change over time because we get, I think, like 4 practices to go to for the media, and I think tomorrow will be periods 1 through 3 again, and then eventually it'll be periods 1 through 6. So as it goes on, we'll be able to see more. But I'm wondering, are we going to see more special teams again tomorrow, or will it change? But from what we saw today with special teams, again, it wasn't a whole lot. But with Joe D, I mean, like you said, I think he's very, you could tell there's a serious sort of edge to him. Like, he's, on you about it. He kind of reminds me of like a drill sergeant, kind of like, he's got that mentality of like, all right, we got to, get everything right. Everyone's got to be locked in. And I can kind of appreciate that because, after a year in which you struggle so much and special teams was kind of, on and off at times, it's good to see that this group is taking it serious and, fully focused in. And then talking a little bit about Mo Kaba, obviously, I don't think anyone's really gone through the amount of stuff that he's gone through over the last 2 years with back-to-back years of his season ending relatively quickly. And like 2 years ago, 2022, when he gets hurt, I think it was against Arkansas. He was coming in with some expectations of potentially being a real force on South Carolina's defense, maybe some all SEC, type of expectations, at least in my opinion. And then that year gets cut short, and then the same deal last year. So it's going to be important for him to, get through this fall camp, healthy, but also at the same time, he has to get back to a point where he is in, not just football shape, but back to getting everything down, learning how to get back to that type of player he was and, getting all the little details down. So that's going to be interesting for me. And then just South Carolina in general, health has been such a major issue, especially last year. Offensive line specifically really went through it, and a lot of other position groups did as well. But I think Shane Beamer talked about it a little bit yesterday, how they're doing different things to try and make sure that these guys. I mean, it's tough to avoid the injuries that are they're fluky and they just happen. But you can do more stretching. That's what they're doing. They're taking more time in warmups to emphasize on that, and I think that's going to really potentially serve them well. And they're doing more treatment after practice and stuff. So whatever this team can do with its own control to avoid anything on the outside with injuries and whatnot, I think is really good. And it's nice to see that, again, everything has to be perfect. And I think they're going to really benefit from putting all this extra work in.
Yeah, I think that was a good point on Kaba, man. I remember going into that preseason before he got hurt 2 years ago, and he was kind of, when it started, I think fighting for a starting position, and we kind of thought he's a rotational guy, he's in the rotation, and then you start getting into camp and you start hearing buzz of, hey, like he may be their best linebacker, like he looks like their best linebacker in practice, and it felt like he was well on his way to having a breakout season. And then, I guess that was Arkansas was like week 2
Yeah,
that
it was
season.
week 2. It was week 2.
He gets hurt, and then he gets hurt in week 1
against North
this
Carolina.
past season. Yeah, just running down the field on a kickoff coverage team, I think. And so, I mean, I remember when he was on Garnet Trust Hour with us going into last season, and he was talking about the mental hurdles of what it was like to be so high on the season he thought he was going to have and have that taken away. And then to just think about this guy having to go through that again, that's tough, man. Like, you really feel for him. I believe they're going to have him kind of on almost a pitch count. Like, they're going to manage him
And
as
that's
much
what they
as they
should
can.
do.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Yeah.
But that would be a great story. Like, I think you look at the linebacker room, and it's easy to forget about Mo. Like, they've brought some other guys along. We know what Debo can do. We know what Bam Martin Scott did at the end of last year. They brought in the transfers, the freshmen, but it'd be pretty cool if about week 2 or 3 you were able to write a story on Mo Kaba emerging in the rotation at linebacker. And I don't know what's fair as far as expectations there, but certainly, it's easy to pull for a guy like that and a guy that's been through that stuff. Jack, let's kind of switch gears just a little bit. We did have media day yesterday, and so everybody was available, coaches, players, pretty much just about every player was out there. And I know you talked to several guys at Birdie's Beamer, and then you talked to some of them yesterday as well, including Nick Harbor. Was there a takeaway or two that just caught your attention from the USC Media Day, like a tidbit or a note or just something that you feel like you didn't know before, something you learned?
Yeah. So a few things, and I'll touch on Nick in a few minutes here. But, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I don't think – I was talking with Mike Yuva from Gamecock Central as well. I don't believe we saw Kaba out there, right? Like, unless I'm mistaken, I did not remember seeing him out there.
I don't – you talking about at Media Day?
Yeah, Media Day.
Yeah, I don't know that I noticed him either. But I didn't read into that at all just because.
Yeah, and it's not a big deal, but it's just like, it's a little thing that doesn't really mean much on the surface. Again, the guy's been through so much, and like we said before, not to go back to that whole point, but I mean, this is a guy that coming into 2022, I think he was the most improved player in the spring from that year. So, I get it why he probably wasn't there, but again, as we go on the season, it would be nice to hear from him, obviously, and see how he's been doing. But kind of going back into yesterday, we got to talk to a lot of different guys, and Nick Harbor was one of them that, I definitely got a good length of, audio from. And there were a few takeaways that I had from him. Wes, you referenced it yesterday on Twitter. He had been catching, 1,000 balls from a jug machine, per week. And that's been really helping with his hands. That was the one thing. It's not route running or anything. That's really the issue with him. The issue for him last year that he brought up was the fact that he wasn't catching passes consistently. And when you look at the numbers, I mean, he had 12 catches last year for 150 yards and a touchdown. And when he really got going, the one game I really remember that he stood out in was the Texas A&M game. I believe he led the team in catches that day, if I'm not mistaken. That was the one game where you really got a glimpse of what he could do. And so if he's able to translate what he's been doing this offseason over to the field in games and catch more balls and whatnot, I think that's going to be huge. And then another thing that, eventually I will be writing a story on this, but we were talking a little bit about the EA game and stuff, and he was very happy with his rating. He was just glad he wasn't in the 70s. But the one thing I kind of brought up with him, I've been playing the game recently, and Wes, I'm sure you can attest to this as well, playing the game. But when you're running routes with Harbor, his best route in the game, no doubt, is just a straight vertical route. And I mean, he's got 99 speed and stuff, which definitely helps. And it's funny, in the game, he's so great at that. But in real life, he told me he really has never ran, deep ball routes. So that's something he kind of hinted at. Maybe they try to unlock this year. It's ultimately going to be up to Dow Loggins if they want to, have him run straight routes at all. Because I definitely think it can translate over. But that was just something that was neat. And, it's definitely true. I mean, we'll see what happens. But that could be a real weapon if it works out.
Yeah, and I think maybe he means relatively. Like he didn't run many of those last year because they hit Florida game. I think
the Florida game was like his only catch of that game. But I'm talking like consistently. And he said go watch the film, and it's true. So I'm sure he also means from like high school and stuff. But
yeah.
But it's also interesting, and I know I didn't get a chance to talk to him, but I know it's been talked about around from other guys talking at media day. Apparently, Joe D, and we saw it in practice today. That's another thing, is that they might try to use Nick, returning kicks this year, and that was something we saw, on the other side of the field. Speaking of special teams, they were doing kick returns and stuff, and guys fielding those kicks. Nick was one of the guys out there, so that would be pretty cool to see him out there returning kicks. Now, how does that go as such a big guy? I'm not sure, but he's got the speed and I think also the athleticism to make it work. But kind of talking about other guys that, I spoke to a little bit. Kai Kroger was another one that I got a good bit from. He was a guy that really did, I don't want to say struggled. He definitely didn't have a great year last year compared to 2022. And apparently he was going through a lot of off the field stuff that it affected his game. And I asked him, what have you kind of done this offseason to kind of figure that issue out and get it resolved and get back to playing on the field? And he just said just talking to family and friends and stuff about what's been going on and trying to get in the right headspace has been the biggest thing for him. And he feels a lot better now and feels ready to go for the season. And I think we definitely could see the return of the Kai Kroger of 2022. Because like when he's on, I mean, anyone that watched those games at the end of the year in 2022, Clemson specifically, this guy was on another level. And I think with special teams, Kai makes such a big difference. And when he's on, I feel like everyone else is kind of doing their part in that department.
Well, and I think when you talk about complementary football and how does offense affect defense and defense offense, and then you add in special teams. I mean, not that South Carolina wants to be a team that's punting a lot, but if this has to be like a team that kind of takes the air out of the ball a little bit, runs the football, plays defense, I mean, I think we all believe this is going to be a much improved defense. So if that is the case, then to me, having a punter who can help you win the field position game, like that's very valuable. Like that's a big part of it. And the teams you face, their offensive approach, their offensive play calling is completely different if they're starting backed up, inside the 10 against a really good defense versus starting on the 20 with some kind of room to breathe against maybe even a defense that they don't necessarily fear. So I think that's something. I think it's easy to forget, Jack, how intertwined everything is in football. Like we look at them as, oh, that's the offense, and that's the defense, and that's the special teams. And it's different players for the most part. Unless you're Travis Hunter, it's different players for the most part on all the different units, basically. But they are all connected. So I think for South Carolina, can you gain back some of that special teams edge that we saw them have the first two seasons under Beamer? And, how many games did they turn by making big plays on special teams? And then that just wasn't quite there last year. Like you said, Kai, I think if Kai himself would say it wasn't the season I maybe envisioned for myself. So can he take that next level and get back to that consistency? I think it's a small thing in the grand scheme, but it actually could affect a lot of games. If you're talking about the schedule, how difficult it may be, and the fact you're probably going to be in a lot of somewhat close games, Jack. So that field position and big plays from special teams, or avoiding giving up the big plays on special teams, really can be the difference in winning or losing a couple of games, I think.
Yeah, because here's the thing. When you look back to last year, I think there were obviously a lot of issues last year, but three main issues I felt like from each perspective of the game. With special teams, with Kai Kroger, his kicks, his punts really weren't getting much distance on it. I think that's such a big thing that he definitely, was excelling at in 2022, was getting distance on it and pinning guys back. I think there were a lot of times last year where that was not the case. And also with special teams, you just weren't seeing the beamer ball type of plays being made on special teams. Occasionally you would see it, but not as much as you did in the first 2 years of Beamer. And then you talk about defensively, the lack of being able to turn or make, force turnovers. I mean, there was a whole month stretch where they didn't get a single turnover, and it really affected them. I mean, you look back to that Florida game, maybe to get a turnover here or there, you're not in a position where you're up by 10 points and then you blow the lead. I think you really have to be able to make big plays, and that was something that was sorely missing until the end of the season. And then offensively, they were it kind of goes hand in hand with special teams a little bit in terms of field position. South Carolina, at least to me, I felt like started off in such, bad field position, and it just really didn't help them out because you're pinned back so much in your own territory and you're not able to get much moving. And then you punt the ball and it doesn't go super far, and the other team's in a good spot to go out there and score. So I think cleaning up all those things is going to be critical this year. Offensively, I think the run game is going to be a lot better this year. You got Rocket Sanders, Oscar Attaway, Jawarn Howell, Juju McDowell, obviously, DJ Braswell, a lot of guys, Matthew Fuller. That's a six-man room right there that could be really good, especially if everyone's healthy. And I think that's going to really benefit South Carolina if they figure out the run game a little bit, as well as being able to block up front. And then defensively, I think we've talked about it enough by this point. The defense is very experienced, a lot of new guys coming in, but a lot of returnees. I do expect the defense to take a big step forward this year. And if they're making turnovers, I think it's going to really lend itself well to everything else that they're doing. And then obviously, like we said, special teams, you make big plays on special teams, you are going to win a lot of football games. So it's easier said than done, but if they are able to execute like the way we all know they can, especially with all the changes that were made during the offseason to improve this team, who knows how they're going to finish out this year, but I definitely feel like they have a really good chance of being better than most expect if some of these things kind of work out.
Yeah, and we got to see how these questions get answered over the next few weeks, which I think is going to be fun. It's going to be fascinating, particularly wide receiver and offensive line. I thought it was interesting. One of our posters on Gamecock Central, USC Bev, had a pretty good point on the Insiders Forum today, saying the talented depth that Carolina appears to now have, how much could that translate maybe to better special teams play? Like I think it's a good point, because your depth a lot of times does sort of factor into your special team success. Now, I do think, Jack, with the transfer portal, it's really hard to build special teams units where, the old days, so to speak, like 5-10 years ago even, you had guys on your roster who were not playing but stuck around. Like, they were not playing on offense or defense, but special teams was a way for them to get on the field. And so they stuck around. Maybe you look, and if you're Pete Limbo, you're like, hey, this guy's been a contributor on my special teams for 2-3 years, and he knows exactly what I want out of that position within special teams. Kind of those little things we maybe all gloss over or just sort of overlook, but within the program, experience matters at the special teams level as well. I feel like you have so much roster churn, so many transfers in and out. Going into last year, I remember Pete Limbo specifically warning us all, being like, hey, I return my punter, my kicker, and my kickoff returner. But all those other positions that y'all don't talk about, it's going to be almost new people. And so I wonder how much that affected special teams last year. That's certainly a factor this year because you have so many newcomers and a new coach. The other side of it is that I do think that increased depth, particularly if you can make things easy to learn and make the concepts sort of easy to pick up, maybe our poster here, USC Bev, is correct in thinking that added depth, which I think depth is going to be the word we're all tired of seeing or hearing at the end of camp, honestly. I think it's going to be the buzzword of camp, but it could translate to special teams as well.
Yeah, I think kind of going back to last year and previous years with Pete Lembo, special teams, if you weren't starting, you found a role on special teams. And I think, we're a guy that comes to mind instantly is Marion Brown, who, obviously had a pretty good career at South Carolina as a wide receiver, but we're seeing him now willing to play special teams. I think he's still with the Cleveland Browns in preseason camp, but that's a guy that, may not see the field much as a wide receiver with that team. But if he finds a way to make the roster somehow for week 1 with the Browns, I think it could definitely be in a special teams capacity. And that goes back all the way to South Carolina, where they put such an emphasis on it. Like, if you're not playing on offense or defense, you better find a role on special teams. And it just gives you so much versatility to where you're just not a one-dimensional type of player. You can be multifaceted in many different aspects. And so I hope and I think that's something that's going to continue under Joe D. I think the emphasis is still there. And like we said, I mean, there are a lot of guys in this team. There's a lot of depth, and we will get tired of hearing that word by the end of camp. But it's true. I mean, it is so much better to have depth than not, because injuries are inevitably going to happen. That is just when the first injury of the year happens. I think people are going to be thinking that South Carolina is right back to, the injury bug hitting them hard. And that's just the reality of college athletics. It's going to happen, especially in football. But I think having the amount of depth they do is going to really serve them well. And if everyone's healthy throughout most of the year, which hopefully it is, hopefully they are, that lends itself well to more guys getting an opportunity on special teams, like we said. And a lot of these guys are good athletes, so I think it can translate over very well to making big plays.
Yeah, James says, I will never be tired of hearing about us having depth. Yeah, that's a good point, man. If you're a Gamecock fan, you've seen a lot of teams with lack of depth over the years. So certainly a great point there. Harbor as a kickoff returner is a fascinating subject, Jack. I was trying to think. So I actually asked Beamer last year when Chris and I had our little sit down with him, was there a chance that Harbor could return kicks? And he basically was like, well, yeah, there's a chance. And of course we didn't see it last year, but Luedecke was a returner in both ways. He was a returner to the team, like he was a returning player, and he was already a kickoff returner. So you didn't really have to force it and make that happen. Jack, I was trying to remember, have I ever seen a kickoff returner as just tall and like lengthy as Harbor? In my mind, I was like, Cordarrelle Patterson was a very tall kickoff returner, but I looked him up. He's 6'2". So we're still a good distance away from, Harbor is like he's 6'5" plus almost. Like he is a true 6'5".
That's the thing with him. He's so big, and not to cut you off, but I wonder, I think there's a lot of opportunity and promise with it. If he does get opportunities, let's say he's on the back line, the last guy out there on kickoff return, someone kicks the ball to him. If he's got space, he's got the speed to make it happen, but it's not just the speed. Like you said, it's the size. He's massive, and he's going to be hard to bring down. I think you're going to need 2 guys to potentially tackle him because, with his speed and size and just everything he's got in his bag of tricks, he could break out of some tackles and make it happen. So, I'd be willing to bet if he's like certainly out there on kick returns regularly, he's a guy that, we haven't seen a ton of kickoff returns for touchdowns lately. I think the last one, correct me if I'm wrong, was Xavier Leggett against Texas A&M 2 years ago on the first play of the game. So I think if you can I think he's definitely capable of taking at least one back this year, but it's got to be consistently out there. I think if you're going to do it, try it week 1, and if it goes well, I think you just keep rolling with it. But we'll see what happens. But it's definitely an interesting item to think about as camp goes on, and maybe we'll get some answers as to what that could look like.
Yeah, and I think, to be completely honest, when we heard Leggett was working at kickoff return like 2 years ago, they had a guy in Juju McDowell who had returned kicks as a true freshman the year before. And, I'll be honest, I was kind of like, Leggett? Like, really? I don't know about that. And, let's not have revisionist history. The Leggett we all think of right now when we think of Xavier Leggett is not what people thought of Leggett 2 or 3 years ago, So I was like, man, that is a tall, big kid. Now, obviously not as tall as Harbor, but I just wasn't sure. But I was like, well, Limbo knows what he's doing. And then you watch him return a couple of kicks, and you're like, oh, God. Like, this guy is, like you said about Harbor, he's not only bringing a speed element, but he is a load to bring down, especially with a head of steam. I don't think you would ever put Harbor as a punt returner. I think punt return is a completely different animal.
A little different.
But kickoff return, and Kingston here asked a question, is it good to have the fastest guy be a kickoff returner? Would feel like waiting for downfield blocks to develop is most important. Yes and no. Really, that kickoff returner, he is able to get ahead of steam. Like a punt returner, if you think about a punt, first of all, it's way harder to catch a punt than it is catch a kickoff. Second of all, you've got that coverage team instantly in your face. So kickoff returners have to have great hands, great hand-eye coordination. They're more quick than fast guys. Like, you want them to be able to make that first guy miss, second guy miss, and then make something happen. Kickoff return, you're catching the ball. It's end over end as opposed to, like, fluttering all over the place like a punt. You have, like, 20, 30 yards of distance when you're catching it from that coverage team that's running down there. So you get ahead of steam, I think, and really, do you have to time when you hit that hole? Yes, of course. But really, if you can time it correctly, a guy like Harbor is almost the perfect candidate because he's such a long strider. I think him getting to full speed and providing that, just that threat, Jack, if that hole, how many times have we seen a hole pop open and a guy just, now I'm not talking about South Carolina, I'm just talking about in general, a kickoff returner like barely misses it. That just added kind of speed, that top end speed I'm talking about that Harbor has. Like, if you had Usain Bolt on your team, wouldn't you want him returning kicks? I would say yes. So you've got the college version of Usain Bolt. So I'm with you, man. Let's try this thing. Let's see what happens. I know we're going on and on about this, but I do think it's a kind of fun storyline.
It's fascinating. And kind of my last point on it, with that question from Kingston, I do think it really, it can work solely based on Harbor alone and everything he can do. Like, he can probably break tackles and all this and that. But it really would help if you have 10 guys in front of him that can block consistently. And it's not going to happen every time. There's going to be guys on kickoff that are going to, fly out down there and break through, blocks and stuff and make plays. That's kind of how it goes sometimes. But I think you really need guys in front of Nick to be able to block enough, give him enough time to where it's not everyone's coming at him and no one's blocking. And it's also like, you want to keep him healthy too. And I think you can definitely do that by using him out there, but you just got to make sure you're able to block for him at least a little bit most of the time. So that way he's able to, prevent from injury. Cause you got like 3 guys coming at him. Get hit the wrong way and it's like, he's off the field and all that. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it, but at the same time, the other 10 guys on the field have to do their job as well to make it work.
No doubt, man. So just so everyone's aware, tomorrow we will have another 3 segments that are open. That's not always the standard, I feel like, is a Friday, then a Saturday. So just be aware if you're a Gamecock Central reader, make sure you check that out on Saturday morning. Jack, you'll be out there again as well.
Yep.
Jack will be there. I'll be there. Mike will have some video as well. If you didn't see the video from today, Mike already has some up on both GamecockCentral.com and the Gamecock Central YouTube, which, by the way, we, of course, would appreciate if you'd subscribe to the Gamecock Central YouTube so that you can see when we post new videos or post live shows like this. And so, Jack, before we get out of here and get towards the weekend, could be a big recruiting weekend for South Carolina, or could be, a little bit disappointing for the fans. We'll find out tomorrow, but they did kick it off really well on Friday afternoon with a commitment from Virginia 4-star safety Kendall Daniels Jr., a guy that, as you know, man, they've been recruiting for a long time.
Yeah, and I think the emphasis on getting more big-time guys, again, it's, with South Carolina, I think Mike might have wrote a story a few weeks back about South Carolina getting a lot of 3-star, lower-star guys, and why it's not that big of a deal, to be honest, that they're getting these kind of guys. But occasionally South Carolina has been, it feels like more and more that they're getting these 4-star caliber guys, and in some cases these 5 stars as well. And with this Kendall Daniels guy, 4-star safety, he had a lot of schools in the mix, and the fact that his final 3 included Clemson as well, and he still picked South Carolina, I think that really says a lot about what that secondary is really building. And I think it comes back to Torian Gray, who has done a phenomenal job developing talent over the years. We've seen a lot of young guys come in and make early impacts. 3 names that come to mind are, 2 years ago, you had Nikki Minwari and DQ Smith as freshmen coming on and starting pretty much every game. And that all became of injuries. And they relished in those opportunities they got. And look at them now. They're going to be entering their 3rd year as starters. And go back to last year, Jalen Kilgore got his opportunity in that first game of the year against North Carolina because of an injury and went on to have a all-freshman season. So my point is, it's all great right now to see a 4-star safety joining, but it's also a really good sign that, when this kid comes to South Carolina, Torian Gray is going to be a guy that can definitely develop him into that next level talent. But Wes, I want to kind of throw it back to you and ask you, how you've covered this a lot closer than me, but what are you seeing from him that stands out in his film and the type of player he could be?
Yeah, and I think, like you said, man, it's a big pickup for Carolina to get some momentum back as well. They had come really close on some guys, and losing Malik Clark last week, obviously, I think stung the fan base a little bit. And so to get back a little momentum going into this weekend was big. And then just in terms of the type of player, the first thing, and I've seen him in person once, the first thing I notice is just he's got length. And we know Torian Gray likes to have guys that are tall, lengthy, big wingspans. And, this kid's 6'3", but has maybe even hit a growth spurt since that measurable. Like I think he's more 6'3 plus, 6'3.5", maybe even 6'4". So he has the length, which seems to be almost a prerequisite to play for Torian Gray. And then I think it's a little different skill set than some of these other safeties we've seen that Carolina has landed. He's more of that like true sort of cover free safety, a guy that can kind of play center field, can cover a lot of ground. I think they've gotten some guys at safety that you say that's more of like an inside the box, like a strong safety type, a physical, like a thumper. Even like I think even Worry and DJ Smith, or DQ Smith, I should say, are both playing on the field at the same time. So one of them kind of becomes a free safety type. But for the most part, those are guys that are come up and hit you. And there was even talk about Nick, even, as athletic as he is, could he maybe grow into a linebacker? Like that was talked about when he was being recruited. I think with Kendall Daniels, this is like a true free safety. And he's a guy that if you're going to play those cover 1 or cover 3 defenses where you need that guy in the middle of the field that can basically cover a ton of ground, he is your guy. You also look at him on film, not scared to come up and hit you, not scared to kind of run the alley, so to speak, in the running game. Several of his clips, he's basically off the frame because he's playing that deep center field safety. He realizes it's a run. he comes firing up into the alley and just cleans things up. So, I think there's a reason you look. This kid's a 4-star on all 4 recruiting services. So, that's On3, 24/7, Rivals, and ESPN. They all independently have him as a 4-star, independently have him as like a top 25 or so safety in the entire country, top 200 and I think 285 overall among all prospects in the country for this class. And really was a guy Carolina thought they were getting way back spring game weekend. And it got extended out. They were fighting off some other schools, fighting off Clemson, fighting off Virginia Tech. I think Virginia Tech ended up finishing second, and they were pushing the stay-at-home angle. But, yeah, man, this is a kid that you sort of look at what they could be losing at safety going into next year. And like I said, a little different skill set than some of the other guys they have on campus. I think he's an early graduate as well, so there could be an opportunity for him to come in next year and make an immediate impact.
Yeah, and that's something I was going to bring up is, and you hit it right on the head. I mean, you hinted at it, the fact that, after this season, there is definitely the potential that you could be losing DQ Smith and Nicky Manwari to the draft if things kind of play out in their favor. I definitely think Nick is definitely the more likely candidate to go. I mean, people have talked, guys have talked about his skill set for years now and put together one more really strong season. And it's like, we could see him be, I don't know about maybe not a day 1 pick. I'm not sure exactly where he would fall in the pecking order, but I definitely feel like day 2, that's probably where he gets his name called for sure if things continue to play out the way they are. But again, if you lose DQ Smith as well, even if you just lose one of those guys, it's like you have to fill that void next year. And you have a lot of good talent in that DB room. Again, still kind of up in the air who's going to go opposite of Odie Fortune at the corner spot. But getting a guy like Kendall Daniels, a 4-star guy, again, replenishing that safety room for the future. And you said it, he's like a true free safety out there in space. That's going to really help South Carolina. He could be a guy that comes in and plays right away. But if not, he's a great, valuable guy that you could have in that room his first year, and then maybe he really blossoms after that.
Yeah, and if y'all are film junkies out there, I would encourage you to go check out his film. It's very impressive. He's making like diving interceptions. Like I said, he's coming up hitting people as well, and plays for a powerhouse. They went undefeated at Maury there. I think they were 15-0. Same school as J.R. Johnson, who is, of course, is a linebacker for South Carolina, freshman this year, who I think's got a very bright future. So good program to get involved with and kind of have some success in as well. I'll tell you what, Jack, let's about close this thing out. But you mentioned, let's go back to the team real quick. You mentioned that spot opposite of OD. Did you pick up anything new yesterday on that? I ended up asking Torian Gray and Clayton White about it, and I kind of got similar answers to the spring in that I think they feel good about all those guys. Of course, you got Bakari Swain, you got Judge Collier, Emory Floyd. Torian brought up David Spalding again, who's dealt with some injuries. And, I didn't get any like indications of, hey, this guy leads for that or this guy's out front. It was more the general, hey, we actually feel pretty good about all those guys, but we'll see who emerges.
And that's the thing with right now. And that's kind of the answers we get a lot in general. I think everyone in the media kind of at media day, if you have any like specific questions about guys, going into the season, a lot of them are going to talk about competition. They're going to say there's a lot of competition, but they can't really say, who's pulling away right now or anything. Truthfully, just because camp hasn't begun. And the last time they saw these guys in pads and stuff was spring ball. So it's been a little while since then. We'll have better answers on maybe who's pulling away and stuff as camp goes on. I mean, I know South Carolina is going to have a few scrimmages, at Williams-Rice Stadium and stuff. And, we'll get to talk to Shane and, maybe some of the other coordinators after those games and stuff. But I think with the cornerback room, I think Odie Fortune has obviously been the guy that is going to be starting at one of those spots. I think they've made that abundantly clear. Other guys you could probably see in the mix right there, Emory Floyd, Judge Collier, maybe like a Bakari Swain. I think you got a lot of options at the position. And the last time I got to talk to Torian was last week at Birdies with Beamer, and I kind of asked him, where are you feeling about this room, and who are some guys we could see step up? And he brought up a lot of the the freshmen and stuff. And the big thing that he talked about, and again, it's the buzzword around here, is depth. And he feels like they got enough guys to where, unlike years past where you've had freshmen come in and play right away, most of that was due to injuries. But he feels like they're in a spot where right now, assuming the injury bug just doesn't hit them hard, they might not have to essentially play these freshmen right away. And that's not a bad thing or anything. It's going to help them get more, learning the game and adjusting to the college level and allowing the bigger dogs to play right now. But I think that's such a big thing that he feels like he was kind of missing over the years, was not having enough guys at that position that you could consistently count on. And I definitely feel like they're in a good spot right now with that. I'm not going to make any predictions as to who is opposite of Judge, but those are just some of the guys that – or I'm sorry, Judge. I meant Odie Fortune. But they've got enough guys, in my opinion, experienced guys at that can definitely go in there and make a good impact.
I mean, it sounds like you just showed your hand. Do you think it's going to be Judge opposite OD?
I did not mean to say that. But again, like we're looking at last year a little bit.
Slip.
Yeah, a little bit. But I mean, going back to last year, I mean, Judge, I think probably had the most time on the field compared to Vicari or Emery Floyd. At least that's what I remember. And Judge was a guy I remember we talked to a few times as the season rolled along during the weekly press conferences and stuff. And that was when he was a freshman. So again, he comes from Rock Hill, Football City, USA, a lot of good talent from there that we know of. And I think he lends himself well to earning that spot. But again, like I said, he's going to have to earn it. And it's the same with the rest of these guys. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how all these competitions unfold. But definitely at the DB spot is where one of the bigger competitions is.
Yeah, and I think just the value of knowing you can rotate guys potentially in and out and not have a big drop-off. The thing about last year, too, man, is those guys, and even the year before, those guys are just playing so many reps. Like, I can't imagine how worn down you maybe are at the end of some of those games, which I think is something they'd love to avoid on the defense kind of across the board this year. So we'll see if that ends up being the case, but certainly sets up on paper for them to maybe rotate. Like kind of you'll have your starters, but then having two guys behind each of those that, are able to go out there and perform well. And if you're a coach, you feel very comfortable about it. So, all right, we're going to have plenty of opportunity to talk more about this moving forward. Again, another practice that is partially open tomorrow. We'll have complete coverage for that on Gamecock Central as well. Jack, appreciate you hopping on here, man. I guess we'll hop on off here. And, of course, everyone out there, come check us out on GamecockCentral.com. This show is over, but we will have plenty more content on Gamecock Central. And, Jack, I'll see you over there tomorrow, okay, man?
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me on as always.
Yep, he's Jack. I'm Wes. We'll see y'all soon.